Okay, welcome back. This video is going to be all about boundaries. All right, so last video we talked about self-care part 2, which was limits, routines, and boundaries. So this video is about boundaries and what they are. So I remember when I was in graduate school, my professors would always say to all of us, practice good boundaries. And then we'd kind of look at each other. They never really defined it though. So we'd look at each other and go, okay, they're saying practice good boundaries. What the heck does that mean? And so I think it's something that we all had to kind of like learn on our own. I think it should be a part of graduate school because it's very important. Um, but personal boundaries are basically rules and limits that you set for yourself when it has to do with um, your relationships with other people and kind of what is allowable and what's not. It's kind of when you think about a boundary, it's kind of an outline. It's where something starts, something stops, and something else starts. Okay. So think of like a boundaries of a soccer field, right? The acceptable boundaries of a soccer field are within that square. If you go outside, you're outside the boundaries of that soccer field. Okay. So we do the same thing with our relationships with other people. And we kind of decide internally what to allow in and what to put out. Okay. So there are three main types of boundaries, traits of boundaries. Um, First, a person can have boundaries that are too rigid with other people. A person can have boundaries that are too, what they call porous. And porous, it's a good vocab word. When you think of something porous, it has lots of holes. So everything kind of gets through it. It doesn't really hold anything in. It just lets everything drain out. Think of like a strainer when you're straining spaghetti or something like that. And then healthy boundaries are kind of the happy middle. Okay, so we're going to go into each one of these things and what the characteristics are and how to maybe put those in practice with some examples. Okay, so uh, a person with rigid boundaries is somebody who kind of, if you guys know in football what a Heisman is, the Heisman Trophy, there's a trophy that goes to college. I think it's like the best college football player. It's embarrassing. I don't really know what that is. But anyway, long story short, the trophy is a football player kind of putting an arm out. You can't see my arm. Putting an arm out like this. And so people with rigid boundaries are always giving people the Heisman. They're always basically keeping people at arm's length, right? So what happens? They tend to avoid intimate and close relationships. They don't want to ask anybody for help. Usually it's like they don't let anybody in. Okay, they're protective of their personal information. Um, they just keep others at a distance. They give everybody the Heisman. Okay. And a good character that I think is a good example of this is if you've ever seen the movie Good Will Hunting. The main character, Will, was this kid who was kind of abused when he was younger and really brilliant guy, but just felt like I can't let anyone in. It's dangerous to let people in because if I let people in, they hurt me, right? So he was constantly giving everybody the Heisman. And even they'd send him to therapists and he'd basically go and like make stuff up. He wouldn't say his real stuff because he didn't feel like it was safe to let anybody in. So that is an example of somebody with very rigid boundaries. They kind of create a wall between themselves and others because they are fearful of letting anybody else in. Okay. Somebody with porous boundaries is, again, that's too loose. The boundaries are too loose and they are somebody who doesn't recognize the rules to a game. So for example, the thing that's coming to mind, first of all, this is a developmental stage for kids. So if you think of like, again, I'll use the soccer game example. If you think of 5 and 6-year-olds on a soccer field, they're still at the developmental stage where they haven't recognized that there needs to be consistent rules in the game. They haven't realize that I have my position and you have another position, everything's negotiable, right? There's no boundaries on the soccer field. They're running outside the soccer field. Now I'm kicking a goal in somebody else's goal. Now I'm chasing a butterfly, right? It's kind of like all over the place. And it's because they don't recognize boundaries at that stage of development, right? When they get a couple years older, and all of a sudden we can have real rules to a game. Then all of a sudden we can have, I know my position, I know somebody else has a different position, things like that. And one of my favorite stories is we had kind of a family that was close to us growing up, the Stopulus family. They are gems and a half if you know the Stopulus family. But Joe Stopulus was a real good friend of my brother's, and I know he wouldn't care if I shared this because that's the developmental stage he was at. But every time he was going to come over, he would literally just like throw the door open to our house, walk in, walk to our fridge, open the fridge, just start taking stuff out of the fridge. So that would be an example of a porous boundary. And he's obviously matured. He's an adult now, but that was one of my favorites. I love Joe Stop. So um, but people with as older people, once you get into like high school, college, adult, all those sorts of things, have help me around it, porous boundaries. A lot of times it's like it could be like the nosy neighbor. They're sharing everybody else's gossip that is not their business. Okay, they'll overshare their personal information. Ever met somebody who you meet them and basically they just like blab every medical problem they've ever had in their entire life or all of their family drama, as soon as you meet them. They have difficulty saying no to other people, to the requests of people. Okay, so like, you know, they're tend to be people pleasers a lot of times. They can be over involved with other people's problems, so they kind of insert themselves when somebody else has an issue going on, when really it's like not their business and not their job to fix. Okay. They can be very dependent on other people's opinions, so they're constantly going, what do you think about that? What do you think about? What do you think about that? And it's not necessarily because there are some people who like to seek counsel, right? That's a spiritual principle is seeking wise counsel, especially with people who have different strengths than yours. But the important thing is, do you actually just follow what somebody else says, or do you kind of take in the information and go back and go, okay, now what do I think? What's right for me in this particular circumstance? All right. So again, they basically are dependent on opinions of others, or like, in a review that you might get from work, how sometimes you can get 1,000 wonderful things said and then you get one opportunity for growth. And so that person almost exclusively, all they can focus on is the one opportunity for growth. And then their self-esteem is dependent on that thing. Okay. A lot of times people who have very porous boundaries, that kind of makes them ripe for abuse, because if they haven't set boundaries about how they're willing to be treated, a lot of times that makes them susceptible to people who are going to come in and not treat them super nicely. Okay. And then they fear rejection if they say no to others in any way. All right. So that is porous boundaries. Healthy boundaries are kind of like the happy medium. Okay. So a person with healthy boundaries is someone who values their own opinion. Again, they can seek counsel, right? But the question is, do they come back to themselves and say, okay, now I got some outside opinion, which can be a very healthy thing, but what do I think, right? What's the right thing for me in this circumstance, all right? They don't compromise their values for others, okay? So their values stay consistent and they hold them from different occasion to a different occasion. They share personal information in an appropriate way, all right? There is, you know, if you have something hard that's happened, there's a term from the Bible that says, don't cast your pearls before swine, right? Those things that have happened maybe to you that are hard, or shameful or something like that, you don't want to give those to just anybody, right? And so you want to make sure that there's trust between you and the person that you're sharing with, because a lot of times if you do that and you let your kind of precious pearls, those things that have been hard or harmful to you, out to just anybody, you know, it can be a scary feeling if you then feel like, oh my gosh, I don't necessarily trust this person and they could do anything with this information, right? Or even just not really care that much to take it seriously, right? So make sure that it's somebody you have built trust with. And that would be another good video, is how do you build trust with somebody? Okay. knows what they want and what they need, and that they're able to communicate that to somebody else. And then they can also accept no from other people when somebody else gives a no. And I'm smiling because it's bringing me to a memory from a friend in college who had porous boundaries. And so she would walk right into my dorm room without a knock, and she would suggest something ridiculous like go feeding the ducks at like, 4:30 a.m. in the morning. And I'd go, I'm sleeping. No. Um, and she wouldn't accept a no. You just knew she would come on and she would, bounce on your bed or whatever it was until the person got up. She didn't just do it to me, she did it to our whole floor. And she wouldn't let you go until you did whatever it was. So healthy boundaries, you can accept a no from somebody else when they say, no, that's not for me. Okay. So the first thing in creating boundaries is basically, you have to think about the different areas of your life. A lot of times people have healthy boundaries in one area and maybe they're rigid boundaries in their intimate life with like a dating or marriage. Some people can even have a rigid boundary within a marriage. And you can have a healthy boundary with your friends or in your personal life, things like that. And maybe you have porous boundaries at work. There can be a mix. So the question is, you want to have healthy boundaries in all the areas of your life. So all the different areas of your life take a little examining to figure out, where do I maybe have rigid boundaries where I'm keeping everybody out? Where do I have porous boundaries where it's too fluid? Okay. And where do I have healthy boundaries? Families that have troubles with alcoholism a lot, either problem drinking or a parent who's like addicted to alcohol, many times they have very rigid boundaries to the outside, meaning they're kind of insular. They don't let anybody else in. But then within the walls, it's too loose, right? And sometimes parents are sharing things with kids that they really shouldn't be sharing. Um, and uh, and sometimes roles can get confused and things like that. So, and that's another good boundary, is people who have healthy boundaries recognize different people's roles, right? I'm a teacher and a counselor. That means I am not going to go to my students and share some gossip about somebody else. Um, I'm not going to treat my students like friends. In fact, that's part of what I say at the beginning of my sociology class, is that I'm a friendly person, and I hope that comes across. But also, my job is your teacher and your counselor. I'm not your friend, right? There's a power differential there, okay? And so that would be inappropriate of me to treat you like a friend. So I will always treat you respectfully. I will always try to be fair to you. I will be friendly, but we're not going to be friends, right? We're not at the same level. I have a rule that once you graduate from college, then you can be friends. You can call me by my first name and whatever. But until that time, we're not friends, right? It's never going to be equal because there's a power differential there. Okay, so another good thing to remember. So think about the different areas of your life. I'm going to actually link a worksheet that's probably the most concise, and it's what I use to help frame this discussion. But it's probably the most concise thing that I've seen on boundaries. Okay, and another great resource, if you happen to be a parent who is watching this, there's a book called Boundaries by Henry McLeod that is probably kind of the quintessential go-to book um, for counselors and everybody else really on boundaries and what they look like, what they're supposed to look like. So if they've at all gotten confused in your family and your relationships, it's a wonderful thing to go to. Okay. Thanks for watching. This has been a longer video. I hope it was worth your time. Talk to you later. Bye.